This is Steal the Show. Fade in. Interior, the Steel Theater, night. Francesca Murphy, a woman of approximately 30, dressed in overalls and a vivid print shirt, tiptoes down the hallway of the quiet theater, holding a candelabra with fake flickering candles. The overall feel of the theater is that it's old, somewhat dusty, but well-loved. There are many doors and rooms. And even in the hallway, there are props everywhere, statues and collectibles from world travels tucked in every corner. There's a crate with white rabbits and a goat, Nimbus, leisurely chewing on some straw in the background. The walls are laid with posters of varying age. The more yellowed posters feature illustrations of a young magician with the florid letters announcing the magnificent Mr. Steele. The newer posters have brighter colors and include photographs of an older Steele. One poster in particular features a younger, smiling Steele holding up an ornate golden key with the headline, "Unlock the Magic, Steal My Key Challenge." Francesca turns a corner and pulls a skeleton key from her pocket, puts it in the lock of an unmarked door, where it gets stuck for a moment, then turns and the door opens. She gasps excitedly. She checks that nobody has followed her before she slips into the room. The overhead lights come to reveal a large and entirely empty room. Francesca, no, it can't be. She feels the walls for hidden panels, checks behind the door. There is nothing.
Ludovica Steele, off screen. How did you get in here? I still have my key.
Ludovica Steele is a man in his mid-70s, dressed in a leopard print bathrobe, striped pajama pants, and a shirt, and bunny slippers. He stands in the doorway holding a golden chain with an identical key as the one Francesca just used. Exactly, you still have your key.
But then, how did you get in here?
Because I also have a key. Francesca holds up a plain silver version of Steele's gold key. And at last, after years of practicing alone in my basement and 1 year as your lowly assistant, I, Francesca Murphy, will become the first ever apprentice of the magnificent Mr. Steele.
Impossible.
Francesca pulls a well-worn square of newspaper from her pocket and unfolds it to read. No. You can't go back on your word. According to the Steal My Key challenge that you have issued for the past decade, you promised, quote, whoever can find their way into the Steele Theater locked room without force or malice will become my one and only apprentice to learn mastery of all the magical arts. I am your new apprentice. I got into the room.
Yes, but how?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tori Bissonette. I'm an editor at For Page and Screen magazine, and I'm here today with Reneé Bibby and Lilian Vercauteren, author of Steal the Show, which we had the pleasure of publishing in our 9th issue, which came out at the beginning of 2026, a few months ago. So thank you both so much for being here.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
So let's start off with this script in particular. What inspired the script? Like, what lives in the bones? Where did you get the ideas?
We actually wrote it for an NYC Midnight Writing Challenge, I think also last year.
Okay.
So yeah, we decided to enter the competition together and write a screenplay. And that's how it all started.
Okay.
Yeah, we started to collaborate, I would say, about like 2 or 3 years ago. Lilian and I are both writers. This is actually our first screenplay. We have been writer friends for a very, very, very long time. And a couple of years ago, I think it was time. What is time? But Lilian and I were like, let's start doing some of our work together. And we had done a different story together, which is also out in the world. And then we realized that the NYC competition creates some really, NYC Midnight competition creates some really great like prompts that would allow us to collaborate. The other perk of the prompt was that it allowed us to work at a very specific pace and timeline. So we had to collaborate rather intensely to get it in time for the competition. But then once the competition was over, we freed ourselves from the constraints of the length, like, because I think it was only 5 pages. It was a much shorter original screenplay, and then we decided once that was once that was gone, constraint was gone, we could then continue to develop it. And to be fair, I don't think we made it through that round because conceptually, the story was way bigger than we could fit. I think it was 5 pages was the, it just, we tried to stuff way too much into 5 pages. So once it was done, we actually just said, okay, now how do we look at the story? How do we sort of maximize some of the story elements that we sort of planted but didn't have time to execute well? And so then we just went at a much slower pace together to expand it and make it, one, coherent, but also more meaningful for the narrative arcs of the characters.
Okay. Was there anything, so it sounds like you got to expand it mostly from that earlier draft. Was there anything big that changed? Anything you had to cut or like big changes that made as you were working through it in the expansion?
I think what was tricky is like one of the things, and for any writer out there who's like sort of looking to really get into a good rhythm, there are some really amazing competitions out there that basically give you a prompt. And the perk of NYC Midnight is that they give you prompts for genres that you maybe don't necessarily write in. And I can say that I got romance a lot of times, and I had to read and learn how to do better at writing romances. And so, one of the things that came up for both of us was the assignment for this one was crime caper. So we basically had to decide, how do you create a crime? Neither of us are criminally minded. And so the thing we really had to expand and understand better was the crime component. She and I are both really strong with characters, scene, but we had to understand, like, how do we pull off a caper? So a caper being something with like, no one's going to die, right? The stakes are kind of lower. It's meant to be somewhat comedic. So we really had to hash out the crime itself. Like, how does it work? What does it look like? What's the setup? What's the payoff? And then really understanding how do we then, particularly because the screenplay allows you to use visual elements to help move that narrative along. So we were specifically looking at, like, then how do we also show without having, because then, without having to use dialogue necessarily, like, how do we show the reader, like, sort of how there are basically two perspectives? There's his take on what actually happened, and there's her take, which is closer to the reality. And how do we sort of show both of those perspectives in a way that helps the reader understand what the actual quote unquote crime was? And it's not actually crime, right? Like, it's all in good fun, and it's basically the two of them sort of playing against each other. And I think it was probably Lilian who came up with the idea of a magician, because definitely the setting was Lilian's. That's kind of her thing, is to just create the setting for us. And so it really was like, we talked a lot about how to do the quote unquote crime component of it.
Yeah, it's such a creative take on like a crime caper, because it's a little more innocent, and it's sort of your like quote unquote victim is almost asking for this caper, like
Right.
literally
Yeah.
putting out an
Yes.
advertisement, being like, just try,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really creative way to take that direction. So I know you said you've collaborated like just a little bit in the past. What was Lillian, it sounds like you kind of came up with the setting. What was that collaborative process like? Did you, each write sections or each kind of take on a specific element? How did it work, like logistically with two people?
Yeah, and like Reneé said, we were under a bit of time pressure. So yeah, for the sake of time, we did work in sections where we would bounce it back and forth, which we also did with that previous story that we wrote. But I think in this case, we had talked it through more in advance, because we kind of had to hash it out, because we had to set it up in a certain way that it would fit the amount of pages. We had to follow the prompt as good as we could. So I would say normally when we write something together, we bounce it back and forth more. But I think this particular time, we had sort of hashed it out a bit more in advance and then started. Like, we had the idea there, and then we started sort of fleshing it out. But I believe did we have a week for this, Reneé? I don't. Yeah, we had a week. Yeah. So we didn't have a ton of time. Like, normally when we bounce things back and forth, it's like, take as much time as you want. But now it was like, okay, you need to get the idea on paper, and then I'll do the next steps. But We didn't have a ton of time. So I think normally we allow the process to unfold a little bit more organically, where we surprise each other where the next person takes it, where the other person left it off. Whereas in this particular case, I think we had sort of hashed it out before we even put words to paper. So that was a little bit different in this case, just because we were more constricted by the logistics of the competition and it being a screenplay. So we sort of had to be economic about it.
Yeah, the 1 week that's a very tight turnaround time. That's very
It
impressive.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that also makes it more fun because I specifically tend to overthink things a lot. So, and I start second guessing everything, and you just don't have the time, which I think is why it's such a good thing to do these competitions. You don't have time for that. You just have, at some point, you just have to run with what you have. And I think that helps me as a writer to just go with it. Don't overthink it. Like, we just need to have a story.
Yeah, definitely as writers, I feel like we have that love-hate relationship with deadlines. They're kind of it can be awful, but also it gets you going. It gives you motivation
Absolutely.
and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And that's what's fun because at the end of the week, if you hang in there and you just get through it, you do have something then to work with, which for us, like, yeah, sure, it would be great if we won the first prize and got through with all the honors that come with that. But at the same time, it's amazing to then have something that's yours and you can then, yeah, like Reneé said, you don't have the constraints anymore of the time and the space, and then you can turn it into whatever you like. And that's really fun.
So is your process as individual writers similar, or is it kind of different when you have to collaborate?
We've been writing friends for like 20 years, like a really long time. So,
Awesome.
yeah, I teach with the Writers Studio. Lilian was also with the Writers Studio. So we also came up through a system where we had a very comparable language with each other. And we do have slightly different approaches to like the work itself. Like, how do we tackle the writing? And I am a person who writes by hand. I do a first draft by hand. And then in typing it up, I basically am generating a second draft. And then sort of within that like second, third draft, that's the sort of time when I might send it to Lilian. And then but within the framework of us doing the work together, and for the most part, when I am exploring a story or piece, I'm really interested in sort of like, I generally have a very clear idea of a narrative arc, an emotional arc of the characters. Like, I want the characters to start here emotionally, I want them to end here emotionally. And I sort of already sort of have that mapped out in my head. And then I'm sort of looking at what are the scenes that allow that to come to fruition and be visible to the reader. But then I think when we're working together, part of what we're being very intentional about is that we are the two, and Lillian can speak to what her process is, but like as far as like what we're working together, a lot of what we're specifically looking at is how do we create surprise for each other, like surprise for each other that still is in alignment with the direction and narrative of the story. So we're currently working on a novel together, and there are some components in which like one of us will introduce a character and then we're handed the story and we have to decide what role does this character play within the story, and we do that sort of like, and we're keeping that, the surprise of that is a big part of our shared process. Whereas like personally, as I'm doing my own work, no, there aren't those surprises. Like sometimes from a plot, I surprise my, like sometimes for myself, I'll be like, oh, I think I need to add this character to make this thing happen. But generally, I understand my own narrative arc going into it. And Lillian, I don't think that's quite your process. No.
No. I sort of go in arms flailing, no idea what's going on. And yeah, I wish I was as structured in my process as you are, but I usually, even after my first draft, I sometimes don't know what the story is about, and that's where I send it to Reneé, and she usually helps me figure it all out, and where the story needs to go. Yeah, for me, I write more. My process is more similar to how it is when we write together, where like I surprise myself, like I have no idea what's happening. And so I think that's why I'm a slower writer too, because I don't have the road is not as clear to me. I feel like I'm going blind usually into the process. It's one of my goals one day to be more clear-headed about it, like you are, Reneé. But so far that hasn't happened yet. But yeah, so we're very different writers. I hardly ever handwrite anything because I'm afraid of people finding that and then reading how horrible my writing is. So like, I don't want to be found out.
Well, the trick is that your handwriting has to be bad so no one can actually read
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's so
I will
interesting.
need to learn shorthand or something that nobody
Yeah,
can.
code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, writing your first draft in complete code. I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
It's really interesting that you bring such different approaches, but you know that you're able to still work together and kind of surprise each other and make like an engaging product through these different processes like coming together. That's so interesting and nice that you can have like a writing buddy, a writing community that you can, you know, kind of play with and experiment with and bounce ideas back and forth. I think a lot of people are really interested in having more of a community with writing nowadays because it can be really isolating otherwise. It can be lonely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I would encourage anyone to consider that there's these creative processes they can engage with other writers in a way that's really interesting. And I will really say that I think one of the things I think was really helpful for us as we were sort of understanding what our work together would be was actually working specifically on a screenplay. Because one of the things that tends to be different between us is as a sentence level, we write differently from a sentence, like our prose is very different. And we kind of, as we're writing together, flex to meet each other's like preferred sort of like how do we set scene? How do we describe characters? But a screenplay was really great because it allowed us to really focus on like very specific components of the work together. We were very specific about like what the dialogue was going to be, and then also to some extent like so sort of what the crime, quote unquote, crime was going to be. And so we were able to focus on plot and dialogue, which was really beneficial, I think, for us to not have to have all the components at play. Like we didn't have to also think, well, how do we frame out the scene? How do we set the mood? We did obviously have some of that from the excerpt you read. Obviously, we're sort of like looking at it like how the camera would move through. But a screenplay is this really sort of safe, interesting, and generally collaborative. Like screenplays in the wider world are often written as collaborative things. And so for us, the screenplay specifically felt really fun because we were also trying to picture what would this look like in a movie? How would this look if it was developed on for screen, which is very different and can be very different when you're just writing a beautiful sentence to describe the mist, because we also have a story about mist, right? And so I think I would say, like, for people who are really, I think the thing that keeps people away from screenplays is the literal formatting. Like, how do I format it on the page? But a screenplay is a collaborative process that I think many people, it'd be a great way for them to get their feet wet collaboratively, but then also a great way to get your feet wet with a screenplay and not find it as intimidating.
Sure. I was thinking about that specifically from the collaborative element that many screenplays or even
Yeah.
stage plays, they often are collaborative. And
Yeah.
you have, you know, you need such a strong sense of voice differentiation between your characters because it's a lot more dialogue heavy. So I think
Yeah.
it's easier sometimes with other people to kind of create these really clear voices in like a screenplay or a stage play.
Yeah.
Did you pick that format specifically for collaboration or for the contest? How did you know, I know most of your background is more in the prose, like how did you make that transition or what sparked that transition?
I mean, it was your idea, Reneé.
It was basically that, NYC offers the screenplay. I don't think they actually do it anymore. I don't think that many people jumped onto it because I think it is one of those things that people find a little intimidating. Even though there's really great screenplay software out there to format your things, you can use some real basic style things within Word to get things to work. But it's one of those ones that it was going to be such a new. I knew, like, it's so new to both of us. Like we were both going to be so new to it that we were going to be able to, like, explore the format and the genre itself in a way that would feel interesting to both of us. So like it kind of had us be on level footing as far as like what does it look like? Both of us are film people, so we also had shared language that way. And so it was just this like little side sort of like gig that we did, that the format itself felt very inviting and collaborative, even though there are, of course, very daunting components of it, right? Like, how do you, because I did a couple of the screenplay competitions with NYC Midnight prior to the two of us working together. And I was starting to learn a little bit about the like, sort of the different ways and mechanisms and language of screenplays that are very different from like a written prose piece. And so I was just getting my feet wet with that. And then I thought, like, why am I doing this alone? Why am I suffering alone? I was like, Lilian, you wanna do this? And she was like, I mean, okay. And so we just kind of jumped into this format. And we were really, I mean, both feel really lucky that For Page and Screen exists, because there aren't that many venues, unless you're like, a lot of people who are writing screenplays are truly looking to get them developed into short films, or, so lots of times people are really, really focusing on like creating something that they do want to see all the way to the end of production. And so a lot of the venues for that type of work are like submitting it to film festivals. And then we were like, oh, we're not
that
level. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we also then had to look at like, where are the places where this can exist in the world and be what it is, and we don't have to try to see this. We don't have to move to LA to make it happen, so.
I will say I was more inclined to do this with you, Reneé, because you immediately said, I will format this, because I felt like that did feel daunting to sort of like, okay, but it's such a pain to format that correctly. And you were like, don't worry, I gotcha.
Yeah.
So that helped, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The formatting, I think, is really daunting to a lot of people, because there's a lot of nuance that you're not familiar with, because most people don't read things in this format. You just see it as, a movie or a show, whatever it may be.
Right. Yeah.
And it feels very unnatural in a way too, to be writing like, and then, like it feels very like you're telling, and not, the show not tell everything. Yeah. But it feels very much like, okay, I'm just literally writing down what you're seeing, and it feels almost lazy to just do it that way. But that's how it is. You have to describe what the camera sees, like Reneé said. But yeah, I was very thankful that you were very happy to format it, and I didn't have to worry about that. I just like sent you a blob of text.
Yeah, that's true. But again, like, I think if people are like feeling that anxiety of like jumping in, there's software that does it, and again, very simple styles that you can just apply within any of your documents. Like a Word document, you can create some styles, and it's really, really, really easy. I say that as a graphic designer is my day job, but just to say that like it's doable. I don't like, if we're sort of thinking about people who are coming to this conversation, sort of understanding whether or not this is something they could do, I want to say like, absolutely, like you should consider writing a screenplay. Yeah. It's really fun. And the formatting is something that someone will help you with eventually. Like that's not a reason to like not do it.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think, for Page and Screen, we really wanted to make it feel accessible, for both writers and readers, that it's not, for people who aren't, I want to move to LA and like make the next big blockbuster, that, you can get involved in other people who are writing in this style without it being like this major life commitment or something,
Yeah.
It's very interesting for us too on the other end, Lilian, when you're talking about how it feels like you're telling and everything's, a little too straightforward in this format. It's interesting for us to see the way that the writer's voice comes through, even though it's this really stripped down, less flowery, if you will, presentation of the story. There's still a strong sense of voice and like the different things that people focus on in their scripts and how they describe the scene. Even though it seems like it would all kind of sound the same, you can still really tell differences between different writers through their scripts.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's nice.
And one of the early things that I think that the format itself requires you to make decisions that in some instances you can maybe leave vague in a prose piece. So for example, one of the conversations that we had really early on was, when is this taking place? And because part of what we wanted to understand was like the practicalities of what could happen when it could happen, the likelihood that it was a young woman working with an older man, what like at what in what times of history would this make sense and be acceptable. But then we were also looking at, we really were committed to, and again, this was like sort of a Lilian thing about like that we wanted it to feel ornate and beloved and worn, but not necessarily that it was from like Victorian era something, right? So we had a lot of conversations about how like what is she wearing, what is he wearing, what does that reveal about them, and then where and how do we help create that context for when this might be happening. And so like even in that earlier scene, like in the original version of this, we had her creeping down the hall with a literal candelabra, and then when we sort of decided that we were moving this up in time for it to be a little less like problematic in some ways, moving this up in time a little bit, Lillian was like, but the candelabra tells us something about her, right? The candelabra is a way for us to understand sort of like the showmanship of the characters. And so then we had to, so like really understanding like when that in that first 10 seconds that a person would see her on screen, what can we learn about her? And so we went back and forth about that, and we finally settled on this idea that she'd have a candelabra because she loves the drama, but that it would be fake, right? But so she's still committed to a bit by having the candelabra with her, but that it was but then for it to be fake was something that also helped us create a context of when it was taking place. And so that sort of conversation was very specific to this format because we could have kept the time really vague in the story, but we understood that like regardless of how we felt about it, a person seeing it on screen would absolutely create an idea of the time and space for it, right? Like you can't kind of sneak around that when it comes to film. Now, some films do that really well. Like I think It Follows is a great example of a movie where you're not 100% sure when it's happening because there's this really great contrast between the tech versus like the dress of the characters. And so there's some interesting happening there. But we weren't interested in that, right? We weren't trying to create an out of time. We were trying to be very specific about like when this could possibly be, and that was of more interest to us than like trying to unmoor it from time and have it be like eternal or whenever it could be. So those types of things were conversations like we really like hashed out early because we understood that like within a screenplay it really mattered. So that was the showing component of it, but also that was a difficult thing for us to sort of like understand. Like that's very specific to like film itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, because one of the things I loved was this almost sense of like nostalgia you get for this old theater, and you kind of like want to see Francesca step into this role and kind of give it a little bit new life. But it doesn't feel like you're saying, it doesn't feel ancient or Victorian. Like it still feels, I don't know if maybe because the characters are so strong and we love their back and forth that you kind of it feels like something, I don't know, from your childhood or something that you're like, yeah, I want to see this theater live on. You kind of you
Yeah.
get that nostalgia sense even early on when you're describing some of the faded posters, and we get to see, kind of the evolution of the space over the course of the screenplay. It makes you feel very invested in this location. It feels very real.
Yeah, that's Lillian.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to do. Like we wanted exactly what you said, like this old beloved theater that's
Mm.
also kind of fading away together with this old man that just clearly needs an apprentice to yeah, blow new life into this old theater. And um I love that about this story, that you do feel like you stepped into an old theater, that you just want to look around and open all the doors and check what's in boxes, and it yeah it does feel very lived in, I think, to me as well. And I personally love that as a setting for a story. Like, that does so much work for you too. Like it did a lot of work for us already. Like you just have an old theater with a bunch of stuff in it, like, and a goat. Like that just, it goes a long way to set this up really well, I think. And yeah, that made this also like a fun story to write because it was kind of fun to spend time with it, I think, and with these characters that were just a little unhinged.
I love that you brought up the goat. I love the goat. And I love that there's just this that Nimbus is just hanging around there. That was one of the funniest details to me. I love that so much. So I know you said that this was kind of your first time doing, crime, if you will take this as crime. But like what do you traditionally write? Is there some kind of thematic overlap or, where's your cozy space writing wise?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I don't really have a good answer to that because I'm all over the board, but so are you, Reneé. We're both all over the board. Yeah, we're all over, really. Um, I've written since then one more crime caper, but again, that was an NYC midnight prompt. So I don't know. I think I'm still very much looking for what my cozy space is.
Although you have your Space Americana
That's
series.
true. I do have a Space Americana series that I like to write, just because I love Americana and recently discovered I like writing sci-fi. So that sort of came up naturally, but I don't know if that's necessarily my cozy space.
Yeah, I'm both because we came up through the writer's studio as writers. Both of us definitely have a really firm grounding in literary fiction. That's what the methodology that they use there. That's their primary content. As a reader, I'm very much science fiction, speculative fiction, new, weird. And it hasn't been until like about 7 years ago, I sort of understood that having this grounding in literary fiction was really wonderful, but that I also wanted to then sort of push into spaces that were a little bit darker. So I tend to write fairly dark. I have a lot of horror, speculative fiction, some dark science fiction, some lighthearted science fiction. And then, of course, because I had to learn to write romance, I have a couple of romances, but even my romances are set in fantastical spaces. So I definitely skew darker. I'm not afraid for characters to all die at the end. And I will say that the benefit of the two of us collaborating is because Lilian is more likely to look for the happy ending, is to look for the joy within the story. And so I think between the two of us, we kind of average out into something a little bit more manageable. So in an interesting way, so that because we definitely have instances in which one of us maybe sort of leads the sort of tone of the story. So for example, we have a piece that we wrote together, we called We Drown the Night, and it is, I would say, kind of in the horror genre. But that's primarily because as we were collaborating on that, I was the one sort of pushing for the darkness. And so I was kind of like pushing for that more, insisting on that more. And Lilian very graciously followed my lead. Whereas in this one, she felt much more strongly about the setting and the texture and the element, and was really much more about setting that tone for us. And so then part of the work like I was doing within the collaboration was to like figure out the logistics, do the formatting, but also sort of like be like, well, if it's happening at this time, what about this and this, and sort of question the details. But she really set the tone for this piece. With our novel, I think the two of us are sort of like we're negotiating that because of course we have to sustain it over a much longer time, like a much longer breadth of content. And so this one, the novel, we're sort of learning how do we then negotiate those sort of differences, because like Lilian has this really great crime caper she's looking to get published very soon, hopefully, and it's fantastic, right? So she's also really good at a crime caper. Like she's much better than me at a crime caper. So because there's a lightness to it that I find it really resonates with people to have that sort of lightness and the joy in it. I'm very sad girl, grumpy, so she brings a lot more of that. Like people can be happy, and I'm like, can I? So anyway, she's more has more of that energy in her writing, and so her like Space Americana, which she's being very like demure about, but like she has this whole series about like partly as a person who once lived in the U.S., which is where we met, and she's not here anymore. She like just really has this really beautiful appreciation for the America and some of the elements of it, and particularly the Southwest. I live in the Southwest. This is where we met in the Southwest. And so she has this whole series of like stuff where She's kind of celebrating like these little treasures of America, the American experience, and she's written the whole series about this, and it's really like amazing. But again, it's because she definitely leans into the joy of experiences, and I lean towards the like what can be terrible about human existence. So
which makes for a good combination.
it does, yeah.
Yeah, I was poking around on your websites earlier in preparation for this, and I saw the Space Americana, and I was like, that's so intriguing.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
yeah, I like the idea of looking at, you're talking about kind of joy and darkness, different approaches across like genre and literary fiction, rather than saying like, oh, I write, sci-fi or romance, to say like I write about the lighter things across genres or darker things. Because I think a lot of writers
Yeah.
should be encouraged to go outside of, their one wheelhouse. A lot of people in MFA programs do, literary fiction only, but there's so much out there and you don't have to have a niche, you can have
Yeah.
things you like to write about across genre for sure.
And
Absolutely.
it's been kind of freeing to hop around like, oh, I'm writing sci-fi and now I'm writing steampunk and now I'm writing a crime case. Like, yeah, to not exactly be limited by sort of, oh, now I can only write literary fiction. And we sort of kick against that too, I think, sometimes between us, like, like we just want to write what we like and,
Mhm.
not necessarily to fit sort of what's mostly out there, when you start looking for places to publish. It brings its challenges with it too, but we're sometimes a little bit like that. Why aren't there magazines that publish this very specific thing that we like to write?
Yeah.
um, but yeah, in the end, it's all about what you want to write and what you feel good about, and I think that's always the endeavor on our end, to just get that out of the system first and foremost.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think.
think that's also probably why we're actually good collaborators, is because we don't feel particularly like attached to genre. So like we had a writing, I was in another competition, one that I signed up for that Lilian didn't, and it was like really short, and I got assigned something. I was probably romance, because again I'm always, or romantic comedy. I got something where I was just like, oh, I don't want to write this, and then Lillian was like, you could just make it that, but sci-fi, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then of course that's what I ended up doing, right? Like so really sort of understanding that like under what's the best way to tell the story, like what is the story you're trying to tell, what's the best way to do that. And that is sometimes genre busting. It is sort of like making it literary but also science fiction, making it horror but also romance, so there's these ways in which if people, and that's so much fun. Like it is fun, and I do think that's kind of what we do for each other, is kind of say like, well, why don't you do it like this, and it's like, oh, why don't I do it like that? I should just try that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're really good about that too. Actually, the other way around, I will say.
Yeah.
So,
We do it to each other. We
yeah,
forget, and then the other person's like, you could make this
here's
a
an
science
idea.
fiction romance, and I'm like, I could.
It's always good to have that person to push you to rethink the way you're approaching something.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I like what you both said about, what is the story you're trying to tell and what do you like writing? Because I think as writers, we get very stuck in genre conventions because of the publication process, or, the journals want this, or, agents want this, and you forget about why you're writing. Are you writing for
Yeah,
you? What is the story trying to say? So I like that approach to busting genres, to think about it that way.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think these competitions that we've been talking about really are good for that, because 9 out of 10 times you get a genre assigned that you don't like. Like I, for example, don't particularly love horror, or sometimes it can be fun, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time thinking about horror stuff personally. But then you can just make it yourself easier by, like Reneé said, then just, you don't like romance, but then make it a sci-fi romance, because then you do enjoy writing it. And yeah, it just, for me, oftentimes that will switch the button of between, I'm just not going to submit anything, screw this competition, I'll just like take the loss, versus, oh, but I could do it this way, and then I actually enjoy it, and I might get a story out of it that I actually like.
Yeah.
So yeah, that gives you a lot of freedom to then still write something that you might enjoy.
For sure. I think that, as we as writers, we need that balance of like motivation and freedom. You
Yeah,
gotta,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
yeah.
So, just, kind of briefly, we talked about this collaborative writing process and that you both have gone through this program together. How did you get into writing? What motivated you whenever it was you started? What first brought you into writing?
Um, well, that's a good question. I needed a hobby that didn't take up a lot of space because I was living in a really small. It was that or playing a cello, so it was like, okay, well, then writing it is. Yeah, and also finding something. I mean, this is gonna sound super cliche, but just something to express myself and sort of get words on paper that I felt were gonna be read, or at least like by my classmates, were going to be read. Maybe not by many other people, but that's okay. Yeah, just an outlet, really, for me. I think just to get something out in the world that's mine. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm definitely one of those writers that started pretty young in the sense that like I was a real voracious reader. Like I read like it was my job. I mean, I was trying to get to get a little pizza, but also I was just truly loved stories, storytelling. I was the sort of kid that like had a little notebook. I wrote a little like I like created a grid of the different types of I was like, I need to write from all the perspectives. I need to do first person male, first person female. So like I kind of mapped out like what does it feel like to try on perspectives and do these different things. And I was very much about that for a really young age, just always scribbling and writing. And then, as it is in capitalist America, you also then at some point like, oh, I have to also earn a living. And it's not, I mean, being a writer is not, again, unless you're sort of in the industry doing like screenplays, and even that's not, not everyone hits gold with that, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like in the instance where I kind of was comparing this to somebody about like it's the equivalent of getting into the NBA, like being able to like live off of your writing. Very few authors really genuinely get to do that. So at some point, I sort of put aside writing, understanding that I needed to sort of exist to make a living, how to afford life. And then I came back to it about 15 years ago and I was like, why do I feel not complete as a person? I was like, oh, writing was really an important part of being a creative self, of being nourished by the world and feeling like I was going to be contributing to the world in a meaningful way. And I went back to it about, 15 years ago and started to look at it very seriously. And I think one of the ways in which writing is a part of my life is also understanding how art is also about practice. I will give a lot of credit to the Writers Studio for specifically helping reframe writing as an instance in which you really have to commit to and practice the craft to get better at it. I do think there's this myth that exists within the zeitgeist that a writer is either born or not, and that a writer, types out something and it comes out as a perfect first draft and then it gets published by the New Yorker. I was watching some film, like watching some like little like Hulu series, and one of the writers had something published in the New Yorker their first go. And I was like, none of that is real. That's how this works. Like there's a lot of like self-doubt. There's a lot of it's a lot of like drafts. It's a lot of like energy around really understanding, really, really diving into a story, understanding like, who am I as a writer? What do I care to write about? But then how do I also create the craft? How do I craft it so that the reader can get that? And that work is hard and it's difficult. And it's not instant success. There is some suffering there. So you get knocked down, then you get back up. And that work was something I really under, because when I was a kid, I was just like, well, I'm just going to write these stories and then boop, 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 and then shoot them out and then I'll be famous. And then understanding that wasn't how that worked. And so now a lot of the work, actually the real partnership between me and Lilian is the fact that we're helping each other through that iterative process. So it's kind of like, here's a draft. And she'll be like, that's close, but you still need to open up this part. This part is confusing. I don't yet understand this. I'm like, okay. And then I have to take it back and then I do another draft. And then sort of really allowing our writing to be vetted by another human, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to connect with humans. And so Lilian, if I could like give advice to young writers, or old writers, nothing to do with age, but as you're sort of new within the world of writing, and I say this as a writing teacher too, is that the best thing you can do is find somebody who will help you make your writing better. You have to show your writing to the world in order to understand if it's going to work in the world. And that's really what our partnership was really built on. Like we did that for years. Like we've been friends for a very long time, but we didn't start collaborating together for until like a couple of years ago. But we built that foundation where I would show her a story and say, and she'd be like, well, not quite, do this and this. But part of the reason that worked is because she was never trying to make that story hers. She was never saying like, I think you should do this with the character. I think this should happen with the character. She was just sort of like, you know what you're doing with this, you know what you're trying to do with this character. I don't see what you're trying to do on the page yet. Can you do XYZ? Or maybe you need to look here. And I'm like, okay. So one of the things she did was trusted the vision of my own story and would say, I see where you're trying to take the story. This is how you can get there. And that is really rare because I do think sometimes we enter spaces where people's feedback is about how they would take, where they would take your story. So like, why don't you have the characters do this? And you're like, because that makes it a crime caper. And I don't want, you know what I mean? Or like, that makes it a action. And I don't want that, you know? And so having a person who sees what you're trying to do with your story is really important. So that's actually what we sort of layered all of this on, was that foundation really.
Yeah, I think that, that accountability and approaching writing like a practice is definitely a skill that newer, you have to you have to show up, you have to debunk that myth of waiting for the perfect moment of inspiration and just kind of work through it.
Yep. Yeah.
So, you've mentioned a few, but just what are some other projects you're working on right now?
Well, Reneé mentioned it already, but we're working on a novel together, which is really exciting. And because that takes a lot of time, and we're also, I will speak for myself, I'm also kind of impatient. We also just now started another shorter story together, just to have something sort of on the little side burner cooking that will be done faster. We can get it out into the world a little bit quicker than a novel. But yeah, we started, I think we started this 3 years ago, Reneé, because I looked at some of the old notes and they were from 2023, which is a little depressing to think about. But yeah, we're writing a book together that's how would you describe it? A sci-fi road trip buddy?
Post-apocalyptic
buddy comedy?
Trip? Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that. It's a bit of a Frankenstein in that sense, but yeah, and that's slow going because we do it the same way that we bounce it back and forth, but then life gets in the way sometimes, and it's a little bit more of a commitment. So, with a shorter story, it's a little bit easier to sit down during the week and, write the next scene, send it back to Reneé, and then have her take it from there. Whereas, we usually write about a chapter, maybe, or half a chapter each time. And like Reneé said too, it's a bigger story, so there's more thinking involved about what needs to happen. But that's in the works. So yeah, we try to have a few different projects going at the same time.
But then you have your own too.
And then we have of course, we each have our own. Yeah, we both work on our own stories separately, and then which we share with each other and give each other feedback on. And I will say I probably won't be writing if it wasn't for Reneé, because I often think, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And then she's like, actually, this is pretty good. You just need to look at it this way. And then, I feel encouraged again. But yeah, probably wouldn't be writing without you. So there's that.
Yeah. It's funny though, because from on the page, I have really dark content and Lilian has really brighter content. But then emotionally speaking about our writing, I'm the bright one and she's the dark one. So we can reverse it in that sense. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I have also separate pieces that I'm working on. I'm definitely leaning more into the new weird and speculative fiction work currently. And so we both have stories that we're workshopping with each other and then sending out into the world. She and I also run Rejection Competition, which is is this project for people to keep track of their rejections, because a big part of writing is also rejections. And so both she and I are sending stories out into the world, getting our rejections, gathering them up for potential win of our bracket and our division, I should say. And so it's, as we're sort of talking about this now, I just realized that we're doing a lot. Like, we're very busy with our writing, which is kind of, yeah, it was great.
Sometimes you need that little like pat on the back, like look at everything you're doing, you know. As
Yeah.
writers, we don't always appreciate it all and all the, you know, the emotional labor that goes into it, but there's a lot usually.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
exactly.
it's funny that people only see, like I never post on Instagram except for when I have a story published, and so which is
Same.
not that often, but then people only see that, but it's not fair because like behind the scenes, a story can get rejected 30 times,
Yeah.
but to the outside world is like, wow, you're publishing stories. Like, yeah, like I've been submitting this for 3 years. It's been
Yep. Yep.
circulating,
For
different
sure.
magazines, and it's not going anywhere until now. So
Yeah.
um, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that yeah, it's easy to just post the success reels, but not how it
And
is.
Yeah.
that's how those, you know, myths get going that, you know, you just sit down and you write it and it's perfect
Yeah.
and you send it off
Yeah.
and it's published because people only see that final product. So they just
Right.
kind of, they're
Yeah,
like, oh, must be easy, I guess.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Yes. But yeah.
yeah. We have existential crises about it about once a week, I would say. So
That's
I
right.
think
on
many writers
average,
do.
yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of part of being a writer. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting hearing you talk about your approach to writing and, you know, Ray, you have kind of, Renee, you have a more structured approach, and then Lillian, you have this a little more like kind of pants in it a little bit, just kind of seeing what happens. But then how you're describing how you started writing, like, is kind of the same. Like Lillian, you're like, I
Yeah.
just needed a hobby and that
Yeah.
one worked out. So
I was
like
like,
it,
I made a grid. I have it. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
see the thread of personality there.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I was a little nervous too about this interview because I was like, if she is going to ask story questions about like I don't remember, I don't keep notes of anything. It's all sort of like Reneé, you're really good about that, but I'm like, I don't know how I remember it, but it's not from notes or anything. Whereas you keep all the drafts and you have all the everything archived. Um,
Notebooks. Yeah, we have a Notion. I built a Notion for us to keep track of the
yeah,
novel. Yeah, I'm just very
yeah, you're
organized
very
around it.
organized.
And it's funny because like, of course I'm organized, and that is kind of my brain. Like, I have an organized brain. I have an organized things. Of course, life interrupts all of your organization. And I think what can be kind of tricky within, again, sort of like the narratives we have around writing is that sometimes, as I'm like, yeah, I have a really organized, this notebook is for this notebook is where I write, this notebook is for this, everything's tabs, everything, is that sometimes people feel like that's what they should then be doing. They're like, oh, I need that. I need to create an organizational system, and I need to have what you have. And what I would say, really, at the end of the day, this works really well for me. It's how I operate. It's how I like to keep track of all of the ideas I have. Like, I have a lot. It's a lot. I got to keep track of everything. But at the end of the day, what matters is, do you get to story? Are you writing? And is the story you're writing what works for you? Then the obligation we have as writers is to understand what our own process is, what works for us, and to harness that and trust that. So the goal isn't for people to become organized, because that's not going to work for everybody. It's not what everybody needs. Some people need organic blossoming, but can you create the conditions for yourself that allow that organic, free thinking energy to flow? And if you can do that, then that's the goal. So, like, the takeaway, if there's no takeaways here except for this idea that, like, find good people who support you and understand your own process so that you can create your best self. Because I mean, I do think to that end, like Lilian, I think partly because you and I talk a lot about process, is you sort of being like, no, this is how I work. And it's like, yeah, okay, great. And that works for you too. Like, I'm not trying to make her me, and she's not trying to make me her, right? And so we're sort of also just trusting that each other's process. And at any point in the process, me being organized doesn't mean that it's smooth sailing. I obviously run into the same existential issues she does. And then that's when that's when I carried you, right? Like, that's when you pick the other person up and you're like, you can do it. So organization doesn't necessarily mean there's not the same sort of existential tension that exists with being a writer. So
Absolutely. I think, recognizing for newer writers that there's not one way to do it. You've
Yeah.
got to find what
Yeah.
works for you
Yeah.
because there's so many, on social media, on YouTube, like this is the way to do it,
Mhm.
master this organizational skill or this structure. But,
Yeah.
you've got to find for yourself what works.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're running low on time here. Before we go, is there anything you guys want to talk about that we haven't covered? Any, final words or anything else you want to promo about yourself?
I think I just want to just take a little moment. I know it to really recognize how great a job I think you all are doing at. I think in this industry, there's a couple of things I've encountered that really make writing possible. And it is one, obviously like training and getting better at it and understanding that like you can grow as a writer, but it really is like places that are willing to support the writing. And it's just like so heartening and so exciting. Like we were keeping of course a spreadsheet of the different places where we were submitting, and there aren't a lot of places, and it was really amazing to find you guys and to see how much you're doing to support writing. And then within that is also like the people who are willing to read this content and care about it and to celebrate it. Like we're all writing so that we have someone reading our stuff. And then you all are like a great venue for that. And we're just like so proud to like be a part of you all and to have this in the world. Like we didn't think it was possible because we were getting no's from places that also published screenplays, and then you all said yes. And I will tell you that like the day that she called me to say we got in was like so it was like so magical. We were so excited. It was really
It was New Year's Eve. It was just perfect timing. Like we were sort of this Indiana Jones, like sliding under a closing door of the with a rock behind us.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we got in.
Yeah, it was really it was really
fun.
great. So our big thank you to you guys for being willing to do this non-traditional format without the pressure of it turning into a movie and just holding this space for us. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Plus, the editorial process was very like it does make a very big difference if it like because sometimes you get an acceptance and then that's it, you never hear anything again, and then you just sort of see your story online, which is also great. I'm not complaining about that, but it does make a difference if you can just tell the editors are excited and they're friendly.
Mhm.
You guys reformatted it again to your own format. But it just makes everything so much more enjoyable if you can just tell that the editors are with you on this. It's like we could really tell through the emails that we landed in a good place with this little screenplay, and it just makes it more fun and enjoyable for everybody. So
Yeah.
yeah, I second what Reneé says. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's so wonderful to hear because Sarah and I talk a lot about how we want to, remain approachable and we want people to feel comfortable and proud to be, included in our
Yeah.
issues. And we're writers ourselves, we know how it is to get a bunch of, template rejections or to, not get kind of ghosted here or there. So that's just not the process we want. We want people to feel involved and feel like there's a reason to be with us specifically and that we're helping
Yeah.
writers get their stuff out there and reach readers.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the series is really great. Like being able to talk about the story and the craft is like so exciting. Like, I was like before, I was like, we get to talk about our story. It was just really fun. And so we just appreciate again that you also created this other venue for us to be part of the conversation too. So thank you
Yeah,
a
and
lot.
good
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was nice.
Like really well thought out. Yeah, very nice.
Well, yeah, again, like as writers, we know that people like to talk about their writing and we're kind of like, what would you be excited to talk about? So it helps, get a conversation going. So
That's totally
yeah.
fair. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for being here and for having this great conversation. We went in so many different directions and it was a very fun discussion we had.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yes, for sure.